In 2004, Tommy Keller, a Maple Grove High School student, vanished without a trace after months of relentless bullying. No one was charged. The police ruled it a case of voluntary disappearance. 20 years later, the old basement of the school was reopened for renovation. Ellen Moore, a middle-aged janitor, was the first to go down. In the damp darkness, she heard a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from a rusted metal locker marked 119. A tapping that followed the beat of an old school song long forgotten. Nah. The basement of Maple Grove High School opened again after 20 years of abandonment. Dust blanketed everything like a layer of memory no one wished to disturb. Ellen Moore, a janitor who had worked there for over a decade, was the first assigned to clean the forgotten place. She descended the damp wooden steps, flashlight in hand, its pale yellow beam tracing the rusted pipes that streaked the walls like old scars. The air was dense and cold. The stench of mold mingled with the metallic tang of decay, and beneath it, something faintly sweet, like spoiled food left to rot in silence. Ellen flipped the light switch. Weak fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, one by one. Rows of student lockers stretched along the walls, their white-painted numbers chipped and fading. As her gaze moved across the final row, she noticed one locker still locked tight, painted in dull blue, marked with appealing 119. She noted it in her logbook. Won't open, possibly welded shut or rusted lock. Then she went back to work. Everything was still, until she heard the first sound, soft yet distinct. Tap, 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 tap. The metallic echo drifted from somewhere along the lockers. Ellen froze, listening. It could be the pipes, she told herself. Old basements made strange noises all the time. But seconds later, it came again, more deliberate this time. 3 short taps, 1 long. As if something, or someone, was keeping rhythm. She swung her flashlight toward the sound. The beam settled on locker 119. Beneath its door, the thick layer of dust was disturbed, as though something inside had shifted. Ellen held her breath. The tapping stopped. She stepped closer, her mind blank except for the heavy pulse in her chest. When she touched the metal, it was ice cold, so cold it felt alive. The surface trembled faintly, like something inside was breathing. Ellen recoiled, heart pounding, trying to steady herself. Maybe a trapped animal, she thought. Maybe just her imagination. But as she turned to leave, a chill brushed the back of her neck. Then the tapping resumed, slow, deliberate, and eerily rhythmic. It followed the pattern of a tune, one she couldn't place, but somehow recognized. A faint echo of teenage laughter buried in memory. Ellen switched off the lights and left earlier than usual. As she climbed the stairs, the sound came once more, drifting faintly through the darkness below. Tap, 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 tap. Oh. Down in the basement, locker 119 stood silent again. From the thin crack between its doors, a faint vapor seeped out, cold and damp, carrying the scent of something long buried, something that refused to rest. The next morning, Ellen returned to the basement, determined to convince herself that everything from the night before had been her imagination. Sunlight filtered faintly through a small window, casting a yellow glow over the rows of dull metal lockers. Yet the air felt heavier than yesterday, as though the place itself resented being awakened. As Ellen swept near the final row, she caught a strange odor, sharp, sweet, and faintly metallic. It crept into her throat, making her gag. She bent down. From beneath locker 119, a dark liquid had begun to spread, thick and viscous, the color of rust mixed with rot. Ellen staggered back, covering her nose. The droplets fell in slow rhythm, drip, drip, like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. She considered calling maintenance, but stopped. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt she had to know. That afternoon, Ellen climbed to the school's old archive office. In a dust-covered filing cabinet, she found a folder labeled Missing Student 2004. Inside was a list of names, and among them, faintly printed, Tommy Keller, age 17, class 11B. Paperclipped to the file was a photocopied newspaper clipping. Police conclude no sign of foul play in student disappearance. The accompanying photo showed a thin boy with messy hair and hollow eyes, an expression caught somewhere between exhaustion and a silent plea for someone to listen. Ellen read further. A teacher's statement mentioned severe bullying. Classmates admitted Tommy was often locked inside a locker. A prank. The phrase locker prank appeared over and over. Ellen froze. She looked toward the basement stairs, her breath shallow. When she returned below, the beam of her flashlight quivered along the rows of metal. Locker 119 seemed brighter somehow, its blue paint catching the light, standing apart from the dark. As she approached, the stench thickened, coating her lungs, stinging her eyes. The locker's surface felt damp, cold, and faintly pulsing, as if it were breathing. Ellen touched the lock. The metal was so cold it burned her skin. From inside came the faintest sound, a breath, a muffled sob, or perhaps nothing more than her mind filling the silence. Startled, she jerked her hand away. She turned to leave, then froze. A whisper brushed against her ear, so close she felt the warmth of the words. "Don't open it." Ellen stood rigid, unable to move. Her breath turned to stone in her throat. The flashlight flickered once, twice, then died, plunging her into dense, suffocating dark. Behind her, the dripping continued, steady, deliberate. On the face of locker 119, the chipped blue paint began to shift. Rust streaks stretched downward, curling into the faint outline of a small hand, pressing out from the inside. Issue. 3 nights later, the stench in the basement still lingered. No matter how many times Ellen scrubbed, disinfected, or aired out the room, the sickly, sweet, metallic odor clung to everything. Brick, hair, clothes, and even seeped into her sleep. Every night, she dreamed of standing in an endless hallway, surrounded by rows of lockers, all pounding in unison to the same steady rhythm. When she woke, the sound was still there, echoing faintly in her ears. Tap, 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 tap. The school had recently installed new CCTV cameras to monitor the basement. Ellen was assigned to check the footage after her cleaning shift. The screen flickered with grainy black and white static, the camera's overhead angle casting long shadows across the lockers. At 2:13 a.m., she saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the row. Tall, thin, wearing a hooded sweatshirt, head slightly bowed. The figure remained motionless before locker 119 for several minutes. Ellen leaned closer, squinting, trying to determine whether it was a guard or an intruder. Then, without warning, the figure dissolved into static and vanished. She rewound the tape. For a brief second, another angle caught a partial face, a teenage boy, blurred yet unmistakable. Ellen recognized him instantly. He was one of the names from the old police reports. Mark Halley, the student who had led the group that tormented Tommy Keller. But Ellen remembered clearly. Mark Halley had died in a car crash in 2011. The next night, Ellen checked the feed again. This time, there were two figures. Both wore outdated Maple Grove uniforms, the kind that hadn't been used in almost 20 years. They didn't look at the camera. They only stood there, heads bowed before the locker. As Ellen watched, she noticed the paint around locker 119 had darkened, slick and wet like fresh blood. Then on screen, a pale hand slipped out through the crack of the door and clutched one boy's wrist. The image jolted, the screen glitched, and the signal cut out completely. Panicked, Ellen rushed to the basement. It was silent, empty. The air hung thick with cold. Locker 119 stood slightly ajar, the darkness inside yawning like a well with no bottom. Something glimmered faintly on the floor. She picked it up, a Polaroid photograph. 5 boys in blue Maple Grove gym shirts. 4 of them smiling, flashing victory signs. The 5th, in the center, had his face torn beyond recognition. Only 2 smudged, inky eyes remained. Scrawled beneath the image, last day of junior year, 2004. Ellen's heartbeat quickened. The air grew colder, her breath turning to mist. From inside the locker came a low murmuring, dozens of whispers overlapping in a single, unintelligible hum. Then, faint but clear, a synthetic drumbeat began to pulse. It was the opening rhythm of Skater Boy, the same song that filled the halls in 2004, the year Tommy Keller disappeared. Laughter followed, echoes of sneakers squeaking on gym floors, locker doors slamming, voices chanting words she couldn't make out. And then, silence. Only the rhythm remained. Tap, 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 tap. Ellen stumbled backward. In the dull metal surface of locker 119, she thought she saw a reflection. A face pale as paper, lips sealed tight, eyes hollow and unblinking, staring directly into hers. She gasped, dropping the photo. When she picked it up again, the handwriting on the back was gone. In its place was a dark, wet stain shaped unmistakably like the number 119. Ow! Ellen had begun to fear the very sounds of the school. Every bell, every footstep on the wooden floor made her flinch. She cleaned in silence now. No more music, no small talk. People said she looked pale, hollow, sleepless, and they were right. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the grind of metal on metal and a sweet, iron scent rising from the back of her throat. One night, she couldn't bear it any longer. She took a large flashlight and descended into the basement. The air grew thicker down there, heavy, damp, almost solid. Mist curled up from the concrete floor, swirling in the beam of her light. Locker 119 still stood in the corner, silent and cold, but Ellen knew it was listening. She stepped closer, placing her hand on the door. The surface trembled faintly beneath her fingertips, as if a rib cage were breathing inside. Ellen inhaled, voice shaking as she whispered, "You want me to hear it, don't you?" No answer, only a single, hollow tap. Then the flashlight flickered and died. Darkness collapsed around her. And in that instant, Ellen heard it, the sound of the past. Before her eyes, the dark began to bloom with light, like an old film reel running backward. She stood in a bright hallway washed in fluorescent glow, clean tiles beneath her feet, the lockers still gleaming with fresh paint. Laughter echoed from somewhere above. Students, alive and untroubled. The smell of soap, of paper, of careless youth filled the air. Ellen looked around. No one could see her. Everything unfolded like a memory rewound. At the end of the corridor, 4 boys were laughing, shoving a smaller kid toward a locker. "Get in, Tommy. Special treatment for you," one voice jeered, swallowed by laughter. Ellen froze. She knew exactly what she was witnessing. Tommy stumbled backward, his shoes squealing against the tiles. A hard shove, then the slam of metal. The lock clicked. Fists pounded from inside. "Please, let me out." The boy's voice cracked between sobs and mocking laughter. The sounds twisted, louder, sharper. Screams, scraping metal, someone crying until the voice broke into silence. Ellen clutched her ears, but the noise forced its way in. It flooded her head, the echo of terror, the weight of guilt, the final stillness that followed. Then came the stench, thick, suffocating, the smell of rot. But it wasn't coming from the locker. It was coming from her. Ellen looked down. Her hands were slick with a dark, watery red. In the reflection of the metal door, she didn't see her own face. Staring back at her was a pale boy with hollow black eyes, Tommy. He didn't speak. His lips parted as if singing. And from somewhere far away, the rhythm returned, the warped, droning beat of Skater Boy, looping endlessly, breaking apart with every measure. Ellen began to cry. "I hear you," she whispered, barely audible. "I hear you, Tommy." At that moment, the tapping stopped. Silence swallowed everything, pure, absolute, like the sound had been drained from the world itself. The locker door shuddered once, then opened just enough to release a faint breath of cold air. It brushed against Ellen's cheek, soft, almost human, like a thank you. She lifted her head. The bright hallway was gone. The basement had returned, dark, still, lifeless. Yet Ellen knew something had changed. Inside locker 119, it was no longer silent. A quiet breath stirred within, steady, rhythmic, like someone had just awakened after a 20-year sleep. Hi. The next morning, Ellen didn't show up for work. Her supervisor assumed she had called in sick, but by noon, no one could reach her. The basement security room was locked from the inside. The padlock knew. The lights were still on. Her mop and bucket lay toppled over, but Ellen was nowhere to be found. No one knew when she had gone down there. When the police arrived, they had to pry the door open with a crowbar. A foul stench rolled out so thick it made them gag. The rusted lockers still stood in rows, all of them gaping open, except for one. Locker 119 remained sealed shut, its surface slick with condensation, cold enough to frost the air. On the nearby wall, a streak of black liquid ran downward, forming the faint outline of a small hand. One officer bent down and picked something shiny off the floor. A key, stamped with the number 119. The old type of locker key no longer used at the school for over a decade. On the desk beside it lay Ellen's open logbook. The final page contained a single trembling line of smeared ink. "He's still here," and the school bell never stopped ringing. When they tried to open locker 119, the lock clicked free with unsettling ease, as if turned from the inside. The door creaked open. No body, no belongings. Only darkness, stretching impossibly deep, deeper than the locker's size could allow. A breath of icy air spilled out, carrying the musty scent of old paper and human hair. In the center, an old alarm clock sat perfectly still, its hands frozen at 3:15 p.m., the dismissal time in 24. As one officer leaned closer, a metallic rhythm echoed through the silence. 3 short taps, 1 long. Tap, 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 da, da. Everyone froze, straining to locate the source. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within, sinking slowly into the blackness, fading deeper and deeper until it was gone. The case was sealed as unexplained disappearance, another file buried among many others in Maple Grove's quiet history. Weeks later, the school reopened. A new janitor was hired to replace Ellen. On her first shift, she carried her mop and bucket down to the basement. The lockers stood in neat, silent rows. As she passed locker 119, a faint draft brushed her neck, making the ceiling light flicker. She paused, tilting her head. Somewhere in the air she heard it, a sound so soft it could have been water in the pipes. Tap, tap. She smiled to herself. Old building, she muttered, and kept walking. Behind her, locker 119 quivered once, barely perceptible. Then, stillness. But if anyone stood close enough, they might hear it. The faint chime of a distant school bell, ringing endlessly for a recess that never ended. Nini, pa, I, Poi, Elel.